Welcome to the Authors Podcast with Lisa Newton. Writing a book is a dream for many people, and in today's society, it has become easier and more important than ever. If you are an expert, speaker, coach, or an authority in your field, having a book is the new business card. It can increase your credibility, enhance your status, and make you the go-to person in your field, opening doors and bringing a flood of opportunities straight to you. You can increase your fees and start choosing the clients you really want to work with. The Authors Podcast show with Lisa Newton is designed to inspire, educate and inform you, both entrepreneur and individual, on how to write a book, as well as writer's tips and strategies on how to actually get that book written. On today's show, you learn more about how to write a book, including writing ideas, marketing, and how to succeed in getting a book written. Here we go with the Authors Podcast, and here is your host, Lisa Newton.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Authors Podcast. Today, my guest is Jarie Bolander. He is an engineer by training and an entrepreneur by nature. He has over 20 years of experience bringing innovative products to market. Some of them include Bluetooth, USB, RFID, Semiconductor DNA sequencing, and SaaS, software as a service for healthcare. Over the past 3 years, he's been a reluctant PR Maven at JSY PR Marketing, which is a full-service PR and marketing firm that specializes in professional athletes, startups, and non-profits. Through his work with JSY PR Marketing, he has realized that well-told stories can change the world. After the death of his wife, Jane, in 2017, he has dedicated himself to helping non-profits tell better stories via JSY Giving, which is a non-profit formed in Jane's memory. Jarie has formed or been part of 6 startups in various management roles. He holds an MBA in technology management and a BS in electrical engineering. He's also an inventor or co-inventor on over 11 patents and has published 6 books: 8 Startup Dilemmas All Founders Will Face, The Entrepreneur Ethos, 7 PR Secrets All Founders Should Know, Frustration-Free Technical Management, #Endurance Tweet, A Little Nudge to Keep You Going, and Business Basics for Entrepreneurs. You can read his thoughts on management and entrepreneurship via his blog at The Daily MBA, and follow him on Twitter at The Daily MBA, or connect with him on LinkedIn. So, after that amazing introduction, I should have Jarie Bolander.
Hey, thank you for having me, and wonderful to be here. Can't wait to talk about books and entrepreneurship and life and the whole thing. So
yeah, absolutely. Where are you based?
I'm in San Francisco, California.
Oh, okay, all right, San Francisco. Excellent. Okay, so let's really start then at the beginning. So you've got a background as an engineer by training. So how does an engineer become an author?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, because I sometimes ask myself how I got to where I am, because it's an eclectic background and an eclectic path. One thing that really had always fascinated me throughout all my engineering training is I was really good at explaining things. And so someone would ask, how does this thing work? And I could explain it. And the other thing that was really great about that is I could also write about it. And so all of the classes in writing, I just did extremely well at. And what was happening is, as my career progressed, I would be getting more and more responsibility. Like, hey, you seem like a good guy. Why don't you manage people? And as I started to do that, I would get a lot of requests for plans for improvement and just, hey, what are your thoughts on leadership and management? And so one of the people that I managed, he basically said, hey, why don't you write some of these management tips down that you've been, helping me with. And, I really appreciate it. And I think a lot of people would find it useful. And so that was my first book, Frustration-Free Technical Management. And ever since then, I kind of got the bug. I really feel that if you can, if you learn something and you write about it, you're just going to learn it even more. And the way my mind works is I have to write things down in order to process them. So it's just a natural thing for me to be like, okay, write a blog post, write an article, write a book, and just haven't looked back. So it's been real fun, and I really enjoy it.
Okay. And so starting with that book then, the Frustration-Free Technical Management, who is that book aimed at? Is it for managers or in every discipline, or specifically for technicians managing people?
Yeah, I mean, I originally wrote it for engineering managers that were going into management. So the typical kind of career progression in engineering and the technologies is that you're a really good individual contributor. You have a great technical prowess. And then eventually everyone's like, oh, you should manage people. And those skill sets are pretty much orthogonal. And what would happen is you'd get a lot of great engineers that would completely fail as managers, even though they wanted to do it. And they're like, well, how do I do this? And so I learned from trial and error. I learned from a lot of great mentors. And so what I decided to do was, okay, well, I should, write down sort of my philosophy, the people I interviewed, and sort of what I think works, because there was really no book out there other than maybe the Mythical Man Month or the Lean Startup. But those were all related to, how to get stuff done, as opposed to the mindset, the internal mindset to how to manage humans, because managing humans, as we all know, is a pretty tough job.
Yep, definitely. And would you say that in terms of managing people, no, actually, no, let me come on to another question. So I think what you're saying is really interesting, particularly on the management perspective, because oftentimes, and I've worked in places where I think some people ended up in management roles by default, and lovely people as they were, I just don't. And I often used to think to myself, like, if it wasn't for the staff, literally we're looking after ourselves, managing ourselves. Some of these managers, I'm always amazed at how they got there. Always. Yeah.
I mean, typically you rise to the level of your incompetence. And so some people rise to a point where, they were really good at doing the thing, but it's really hard to step away from doing the thing. Because the main thing about management that unfortunately a lot of technical people don't get, and this is specifically technical people, it's not your job to do the work. It's your job to make the people under you successful and have them do the best job they can. You literally should not do any engineering. And that is a hard thing, a really hard thing to do. And that's where people mostly get in trouble.
It reminds me a little bit of like the E-Myth, but what that more is about is when you start to get into, you start off wanting to start your own business as a technician. And then when you actually start running the business, the last thing you should actually be doing is the technical work. It's everything else that requires managing a business, which is why a lot of small businesses don't work in the end, because there's so many other things that need doing.
Oh, yeah. You're 100% right. It's the same thing. It's just in the technology field and engineering, it's even more pronounced, because a lot of engineers, their self-worth is wrapped up in their technical prowess. And it's respected more how technical you are as opposed to how good a manager you are. I mean, it's just a common thing where most engineers are like, we don't need management. And then, I mean, Google famously did this, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. They literally eliminated middle management. They're like, we don't need middle managers. And it turned out to be an absolute disaster. Chaos reigned. And all of the, director, VP level, CEO level people were getting all these questions. They're like, how come you guys can't figure it out? It's like, well, because someone needs to tell us what to do. We're just not going to be free range engineers, walking around the plane like, oh, what should we do? And then they reinstituted it. In fact, they even doubled down on what are good managers and how to train them, and what are the traits and the values and the beliefs that they really needed to instill in them, because they realized, and I mean, this is historical. I mean, throughout all of time, large organizations, large societies need to organize, and they need to have middle managers, and need to have levels of hierarchy, because you can't manage a massive organization with a lot of, there has to be someone in charge. So it was just interesting to see how they came full circle.
You were listening to the Authors Podcast with Lisa Newton. Please do subscribe to, like, and share this channel. Okay, so if you're just tuning in, I'm talking to Jarie Bolander, and his first book was Frustration-Free Technical Management. And so, Jarie, after that, you did say that you got the writing bug. So you got your first book out there. And then what book followed on from that?
The second one, I think, was Endurance Tweet, which was like a Twitter book, which you can, these little nuggets of wisdom on how to get through hard stuff. So that was a pretty, kind of an interesting model and an interesting kind of framework. So that was pretty fun to do. I think that the one after that was Business Basics for Entrepreneurs, which was actually a blog series that I did and decided to put into an ebook, which is one of the things that's, I think, for those that are looking to want to write a book and get a little scared of it, or like, I don't know what to do. I blogged that book, which I thought was a really great way to, get motivated and, see what worked. And, the discipline of writing routinely is what gets you through writing books. So I thought, that was a great way to do it.
And as you were writing the blog, did you have the idea in mind to turn it into a book, or was it only afterwards where you thought, I've actually got some good content here, I could turn this into a book?
And when I first started out, I did not have the intent of that, but I purposefully made it a series. So I think it's like 25 lessons or something. And I was like going through my MBA. So I'm like, oh, I've got all this knowledge. I should write about it. People want to know, And so I did an outline, and I just kind of did one after the other. And it was part of my, learning learning in graduate school. And, again, I needed to synthesize it. So I figured, well, maybe other people would need to synthesize it too. And then as I think I got to the end, I realized, I could, with some changes, I could put this together in a quick ebook and put it on Amazon. And so that's what I did. And, it's just a nice little,
No, absolutely. And I like what you say there about synthesizing information, because I think I'm a little bit like that. And I find that when I write things down, it holds, it sticks a lot better. And, I've been in lectures, and sometimes the teacher will say, right, pens down, everyone, I don't want anyone taking any notes, just listen to what I've got to say. And I find that really difficult. I'd like to make notes.
Oh, me too. I mean, I like to make notes. I actually like to doodle. And people think, well, how can you be listening when you're doodling? For me, the act of physically doing something or writing a note is now reconfirming what I'm hearing. And I have to do that as part of my learning process. It's just, it's always been the way that I've learned the quickest, and as you said, it sticks. So yeah, I mean, I don't see why anyone would care if you're writing notes. Like, is it really that important? Like you have to hang on the professor's, every word, because it's just so important. It's like, yeah, you're too full of yourself. Nothing you can really say is that important that you can't, you're going to only probably remember a 25th of what he said anyway.
Well, I think people have different learning styles. So some people are auditory, they say kinesthetic, and then there's the other different ones. Some people learn by doing. I definitely, it really helps me to write notes, and I know that whenever I've got ideas for books and things, I like to have a notebook with me. I still have a pen and paper diary. I can't do the electronic thing. I've got to have a pen and paper. So in terms of when you're writing, do you write to paper or do you write straight directly onto the computer?
So I typically have a notebook as well that I jot down notes, real quick, like thoughts or outlines. And then I go directly to the computer, and I use a tool called Scrivener, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Yeah. And I like Scrivener because it's the way I think, and it's like, old school note cards and stuff that you can pull around on the screen. But I typically will do, have a notebook, write some notes. I will actually plan it out in a pretty decent detail once I get the idea. And the reason I do that is I kind of need a work plan. So my work plan, I need to know, okay, I'm going to write 35 chapters. Each chapter is going to look like this. And I have a kind of an idea because I'm a planner instead of like, the difference between a planner and a pantser, like some writers are just like, I just write and it flows like the world. And I'm like, well, that's not me. So I literally can't do that. But I also I'm a certified StoryGrid editor, which is a methodology that I found a couple of years ago, which is kind of a framework in which to write better stories. And it's a very objective view of how to write. Some people say a little anal. Some people say, very structured and rigid. But I like that methodology and kind of how I write now since I found the method. It just helps me manage my time, because one of the worst things that you can do as a writer is like you sit down at the blank page, not knowing what to write.
Yeah.
That's just the worst. So for me, if I have a plan and I have an outline and then I've got some detailed, like, okay, today I need to write this, or this isn't working, or I've got a list. It's just, I know what to do. So now when I sit down, it's like, no, you got to write the chapter on, self-belief. Okay. Okay, now I can go. And I don't have to worry about what to write. For me, that's really powerful. Some people don't like that, but I've found that, if I want to be productive and I want to feel good about what I'm doing and feel good that I'm making progress, that my method has to be one of this, what I would say, outline / work plan, like I would do for any project that I've ever done, because then it keeps me accountable.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I haven't heard of that before. So you said StoryGrid Editor, which is a framework.
Yeah, so the book's called The StoryGrid.
Okay.
It's written by Sean Coyne. You can just look up storygrid.com. There's just a ton of free information about genre and obligatory scenes and conventions and, the mechanics of writing and masterworks. And there's a lot of great information, people are interested, because one of the things that I found really, really frustrating about writing, especially in writing groups or when I would send something or hire an editor or anything like that, is that the comments were always so like subjective and odd, like, oh, I just didn't feel it, or yeah, this word doesn't really work. And I'm like, I don't care about that. I care more about, does it make sense? Does the story flow? Is the setup I did in chapter 2 paying off in chapter 6? Do I have the is everything in place so that it like flows? From a structural developmental editing point of view, I just never found anyone that was really that good at it until I found the StoryGrid method. And now I use that for everything I do. In fact, even my business where I help other people tell better stories, I use the same framework, the same story structure that's been, throughout all of time. Stories have structure. This is the way world works. We've been telling each other stories since the dawn of time around the campfire, right? I mean,
absolutely.
We had to, because someone's got to learn how to not get eaten by the saber-tooth tiger, or that, or that berry will kill you. I mean, in that oral tradition of story, the general tradition that us as humans have of, combing around a campfire in small groups in our immediate families or in our extended tribe, and telling each other stories to not only entertain and educate, but to feel connected. And so I always want to write better stories. And so I never could find a way to objectively say, yeah, my story works, my story doesn't work. Now, no one may like it, but at least I know what to work on. So if I'm writing, a chapter, and as an example, the inciting incident or the change that's going to happen to my protagonist isn't very strong, or it's not there, or there's no conflict, then it's not going to work as a story. I mean, it's just going to fall flat. No one's going to read it. And now that I have a framework and a methodology to describe that, when I go work with like one of my editors, my editor now, Leslie, who is a story grid editor as well, we have this great language where we can be like, yeah, inciting incident doesn't work. Your crisis is weak. You're not on genre. Where's this scene? Where's that scene? You didn't set that up. Who is this character? I can fix that. I'm like, okay, great. What I got to fix. And that has just been a game changer and a lifesaver, because a lot of times as authors, and we all know this, right? Sometimes we need the good feedback. We need feedback that's going to tell us how to improve our writing. It's hard to get good feedback. It's hard to get anyone to even read our draft. Right? I mean, your friends and family and your mate, maybe your mates, your significant other will be like, yeah, it's good. And you're like, okay, well, how can I make it better? And then it's, oh, I don't know, it's just okay. Yeah, that character really didn't do it for me, or I didn't like that word, or do you really need to write a whole chapter on? And you're like, I'm hungry tell me how to make this thing better. Like, give me the checklist on and for me, I crave that. So anytime I'm like writing a book, it doesn't matter the book, it doesn't matter if it's fiction or nonfiction or whatever it is, I'm like, okay, I'm going to start with the story grid method. I'm going to go through, the 6 core questions that story grid editors go through. I'm going to have a top level outline, a macro outline, then I'm going to do a micro scene level outline, and I'm just going to frame this thing up like a house, get the bones down, and then I'm just going to jam right through it, because for me, that is just, it's beautiful. I feel so much better, It's like, I have a plan, but I'm an engineer, so a lot of people may or not be like that.
Yes. And that's just what I was going to come back to. Like, you sound very structured. I think you sound like me, to be honest, but I'm not an engineer. But I like methodology. I like structure. I like law and order. I like to know what step comes next. I think it's a good approach. I'm sure there's some very creative people out there that might disagree, but I agree with you, actually. I like that idea. Now, you work with JSY PR and Marketing, and you help people tell stories. So how does that relate? Is it business stories, or is it individual stories? How do you help people in that kind of sense tell stories?
So typically it's for a brand or a company or a nonprofit. And also I do work with professional athletes. And I got into this because of Jane, my late wife. She did PR and marketing, was a publicist for professional athletes. That was her job. I mean, and she had a lot of famous people that she dealt with. And when we met, she was trying to expand her business and do more startups and nonprofits. And since I was a startup guy, I'm like, well, I know that. And so she taught me a lot of this PR stuff. And, when she got sick, I took her business over and just started to help brands, companies, sometimes even founders and people and executive directors kind of craft and hone their story so that it could get through all the noise, right? Because there's a lot of noise out there. As we all know it, we're just inundated every day with one thing or another. And what I've found over time is that the structured storytelling that I learned, how I write, my ability to synthesize complex things, complex technology, complex ideas into really simple narratives was just, everyone needed that. I mean, there's a lot of people that are like, God, I'm not getting any traction. I just don't know why no one cares. And I'm like, well, tell me your pitch. And they would pitch it. I'm like, well, I don't understand what you're doing. And I'm an engineer. I should understand this. And so what's happened over time is that I've really found a niche, so to speak, in being able to help organizations with their story as the first thing that you should get right. Because one of the things that a lot of people get hung up on, and even a lot of artists and a lot of creatives, a lot of engineers, and a lot of business people too, they are so in the weeds in their business or in their book or in their creativity. I mean, they just know it so intimately that when they try to explain it, they're worried that they're going to leave something out. They're like, oh, well, I got to tell them I'm doing these 10 different things and da-da-da-da. Like, when you read my bio in the beginning, I mean, that's a lot of stuff. Like, I'm thankful that you read it. I hopefully people paid attention to it, but chances are they didn't. Chances are they're not going to remember what I do or all the other things I do, but they're going to remember like one or two things. They may remember I have a funny name. They may remember that my wife passed away. They may remember that I'm an engineer by training, but an entrepreneur by nature. I mean, that's the reason why that's up front, because it's easy to understand. You're like, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that, right? And so this is like pretty much a universal thing for anyone that's an author, a business person, an entrepreneur. Even in our personal lives, we have a narrative. And if we're going to meet someone at a cocktail party, or let's say, we're trying to meet a mate or make friends or get an job interview, or we're on the job, the better we can communicate who we are, what we think, what our kind of narrative is, the more people are going to want to talk to us, the more people are going to be interested. And the more interesting that is, the more memorable you'll be. The more memorable you will be, the more opportunity you'll get, right? So.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. You were listening to the Authors Podcast with me, your host, Lisa Newton. You can email me, lisa@lisanewton.co.uk. And remember, we have the Inner Circle, which is for writers just like you, and you can join us at writerbook.net. If you're just tuning in, I'm talking to Jarie Bolander, who's the author of 6 books. He is an engineer by training, but an entrepreneur by nature. So, Jarie, tell me about, you've got, you're an inventor and a co-inventor of over 11 patents. So tell me about that. What's working with people, how you put things together,
Yeah. So, as an engineer, my job's to solve problems. And so if you know any engineer in your life or any technical person, if there's no problems to solve, they get a little bored. And if they're not complaining about the problems they're solving, there's a problem, because they're always complaining about, they just love that, right? Because their job's to solve problems. And so what someone told me early in my career was that if you spend more than a day solving something, chances are it's patentable. And I'm like, what, really? He's like, yeah. It's like, just think about it. Not only if it takes you a day to solve, it may take you a couple of days or whatever. So anything you work on that is sort of like, oh, I've never seen anything like that, or this is a hard engineering problem, chances are it's patentable. So I literally I'd be working on problems, and since I was a pretty good writer, I would write up these things called disclosures, and I would just explain how I solved a problem, and then I'd because, these were at big companies, I would send it off to the lawyers and then they'd be like, oh yeah, okay, why don't we file a patent? So through that process, I would collaborate with other people and we would solve problems together. And, some of the startups I was at, we had to write patents because patents are an important piece or one of the important pieces of a technology startup for making your, protection, your what they call a picket fence.
Yep.
And, if you're a good writer and you can solve technical problems and you can write about them, chances are it's pretty easy to get a patent. It's really not that like, oh my gosh, you're such a genius. No, it's not a genius thing at all. It's like, I solved a problem and here's how I did it. What do you think? And so that helps a lot.
Okay. And how long does a patent last for?
In the US, it's 20 years, I think, now.
Okay. Wow. So, talk me through one of the so one of your books is 8 Startup Dilemmas All Founders Should Know. So what's one of the biggest ones that as a dilemma that all founders should know when running a business?
Go solo or form a team is one of the bigger ones that a lot of times people don't either get founders quick enough or they get the wrong founders or they don't they think they can go it alone. And now if you're like a solopreneur, freelancer running your own business, that's different, right? You're going to need some help, like maybe in bookkeeping, like, some of the stuff that you do. I mean, you're like me. How many businesses do you have? Like 3 or 4? It's awesome. I love people like you because it's like, see, I'm normal in one word. No, I love the hustle and like, it's because you're passionate about what you're doing and you want to help people, right? So, but you have to have a team.
Yeah.
Even if you're a solopreneur, you have to have a team. And so really it's letting go of the ego and really being like, I have limitations. How am I going to put a team of people around me that's going to make us all successful? And that's a tough one. I mean, there's a bunch of other ones like, do I make it myself or do I go buy a solution is another one that sometimes gets in the way. When do I release my product? Like when is it ready for the world? So, which can be hard, right? So, these dilemmas they're meant mostly for technology startups, but they are applicable in some ways to, solopreneurs that are being trying to either expand, like the E-Myth as an example, like you brought up the E-Myth.
Yeah.
They talk all about processes and systems. Some of those processes and systems may require a contractor, like your bookkeeping, like your social media. If you don't want to do that, you want to, or, graphic design or something. So the team is really important.
Yeah, no, it's I think one of the hardest things, and it's a conundrum, and it's a funny thing because with some people that I talk to who would love to start their own business, one of the reasons why they want to start their own business is because they don't like their boss. But then I always say to them, but you're always going to be working with people. And if you start your own business, yes, you can do it by yourself, but only up to a point. And then you're going to have to start employing people. And I think sometimes people think they'll get a lot of freedom because they'll be, freelance and able to do whatever they like. And yeah, you can to an extent, but you do need to collaborate and to cooperate. And it is I call it a skill. And it's something that in business you have to learn. You can't not do it. So your suppliers, your customers, your staff, everyone is part of the bigger picture, and you have to manage those relationships, those people effectively, as well as deliver the product or service and everything else that comes with it.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's, one of the most underrated skills, I think, that, especially in the startup tech world, you get all these people that are like super smart and go and run fast and break things. And the mantra, that the the bravado to, all we care about is the meritocracy and just work, is really the empathy for the condition that someone else is in. Being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and really be like, yeah, I can see how that's hard on you. How are we going to manage through it? Because a lot of management and human interaction, but specifically a lot of management, is not necessarily telling someone what to do. It's encouraging them to solve it themselves. And it's also encouraging them to be who they are. So I always tell like managers and CEOs, especially young CEOs of startups, like, your job is to make everyone else successful. Your sole job is to make everyone successful. I mean, as a CEO of a startup, you got to raise money, but your job's to make them successful. So how you do that, think about the best way to do that. And some people are going to be motivated by different things. Some people are going to need more help. But generally, your job is to make everyone else successful at the expense of your quote unquote success or your personal success or your personal productivity, because that's not your job. Your job's not to be personally productive. Your job is to make your people, the people around you that you manage, productive.
And I think that's a nugget. And that sort of thought process is turned on its head, because when you're an employee and you're working for someone else, it is you, and you put yourself out there. But when it's your business, it is putting your staff, your team, your people forward, in the hope that, that brings the whole business and everything forward along with it, and that they don't run off to work with the competition or go in competition against you, for example.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually a great way to put it. I mean, how often have you worked with someone who is threatened by their employees' success or the people that work for them success, and how they almost, there's probably times where they sabotage that other person because it's like an ego thing. It's like, oh, they're going to be more successful than me. But really it's like, well, you're their boss. So therefore it makes you look good if they're successful. But that's a hard thing in your soul and your gut to be like, hard to swallow. Right. So I don't know. I mean, I would say it like through maturity, because I'm a little more mature now. And through some tough times in my life and really putting in perspective what matters in the world. You become a lot more comfortable as you get a little older and you have a little more experience. And hopefully, that wisdom is like, hopefully you'll mentor the next generation. Hopefully you'll be a little more kind and you won't try to, be that guy or gal that's kind of pushing people down. And, I think it's universal to any kind of business, any kind of creative endeavor, being generous. I mean, as an author, as an example, like, so you're an author, you write this thing, you put it out there in the world, right? You don't know if anyone's going to read it. You don't know if anyone's going to like it. But as an artist, as a creative, once it's done, it's not yours anymore. It goes off in the world and it has a life of its own. And your gift as a creative, as an artist, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, and it is a gift because it's a hard thing to create something from nothing. But you put your gift to the world and your ego says, I hope people like it, right? Because it's a personal thing. Once you get past it's really not mine anymore, the world needs to take it for what it is, then you're free. You're free to create more. And eventually, maybe you'll get on the New York Times bestseller. Maybe more people will give it a review on Amazon. Maybe. But the act of putting your gift in the world, that should be enough. That's the beautiful thing. And that takes a lot of self-reflection, obviously, because I didn't get to that like right away. But, you have some tragedy happen in your life and you go through some tough times. It really puts the world in perspective. And so, yeah. Absolutely.
And just final sort of thoughts. Are you writing anything at the moment? Anything?
Yeah, I'm actually...
You can share with us?
Yeah, sure. Actually, yeah. I'm actually almost done with a memoir of my life and Jane's life and what it was like to, experience, your wife's or your mate's battle with leukemia. So that's been a very cathartic and tough, journey, grief and sorrow, and I had some problems with alcohol that I'm sober, been sober for about almost a year and a half. And it's, again, like I talked about before, I have to write things down to process them.
Yeah.
And, it's been a great experience to process all those feelings and really put in a tangible form the experience that was not only a life-changing experience for me, but a life-changing experience for a lot of other people, and especially men who go through this process of grieving the loss of their loved one, their spouse. There's not a lot out there for them to feel like they're not alone. And I felt really, really alone. And it was a really, hard thing to swallow. And in order for me to live the life I need to live and to live on Jane's legacy, as well as be happy and move on to another relationship, which I have now. I have a fiance who's just a wonderful woman. I had to process all that so that I could show up and be the best I can be for Minerva, my fiance, who, was a very kind and considerate, loving, caring person who helped me through this journey. And that's a tough thing. And so, the memoir not only is for me, because it is, I wrote it to put my feelings down so that I could process them. But my hope is that other men, particularly people that have gone through loss, when they read it, they're like, oh, wow, yeah, I'm not alone. So someone do the same thing, because it's a really lonely thing. You feel so disconnected. People treat you different. When you're a widower, people treat you different. They just do.
It's interesting you say that, because I was reviewing a book. You said just so many interesting things, but just to touch on a few things. So when you talked about your, trying to find people who can read your work for you. So I've got someone who, and I must admit, they gave me their book, I don't know if it was 6 months, 9 months. And every so now and again, I'd get an email, oh, Lisa, have you had a chance to read it? And I hadn't. And I just thought, oh, gosh. So I managed to read it. It wasn't even a long read, an hour and a half. And once I got into it, it was a page turner. I really, really enjoyed it. And one of the things that he put in the book is there's someone in there that their partner dies. No, actually, no, their partner, they get divorced. One person's got divorced, and then she meets someone and his partner has passed away. And what was said in that book is that people treat you like, because you might be newly single again. Some people see you as a threat, potentially. Others just think, you're unlucky. I don't want that bad luck kind of thing. And it's a really difficult thing, because you feel it but don't really want to say necessarily, but people do treat you differently. And when I read that, and I thought about one or two people that I know that had gone through grief, and I thought, you know what, Lisa, there's more you could have done for them, and I didn't really know how or what to say. So
it's really tough.
It's
really tough. Even to this day, I sometimes have a hard time with it, and I've been through it, So yeah. But
thank you very much for sharing some really good ideas. So from this, I think, listeners, there's a few things just to recap. So you, for those of you looking for some tools, particularly because Jarie is a technology management person, but Scrivener as a tool, for those of you that haven't heard of that one before, that's worth checking out. Also the Story Grid editor, and to also think about, if you're writing a blog, how you could actually take that material, turn it into an ebook format. If you're working and you have to write a lot of notes, that could be that could form the potential basis for a book format, particularly if you have to write things down a lot. And also in personal tragedy and in loss, you can use personal experience to turn that into not just a book, a memoir, but to actually, if writing is a cathartic release, which I know for myself, I find it a cathartic release. I've kept a diary since I was probably about 8 years old. And just at the end of the day, just to write down thoughts and what happened in the day, it just helped me process a lot. So just if that's you and you've got a lot of maybe diaries or whatever it might be, to think about how you could potentially turn that into a book format as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's great advice.
Okay, so today my guest has been Jarie Bolander, and you can find his website, thedailymba.com. You can find him on Twitter at thedailymba, and you can also find him on LinkedIn. And Jarie is spelt Jarie Bolander. So Jarie, any final words?
I mean, we've covered a lot, as you can imagine, because I mean, life has a lot of challenges and joys and struggles in it. I'd say if you're a writer, keep writing, no matter how frustrating it is. Try to read a lot as well. That's one of the things that I've learned, that I'm a better writer when I read both fiction and nonfiction. Any favorite books of yours? Oh, wow. There's a ton. I just finished reading Anti-Fragile, which is the follow-on to The Black Swan by Talib. Read a book called Give and Take. I think it's by Adam Grant, which is a really good one. And then on the fiction side, I reading this book called I think it's American Assassin. I think is where it's just one of those like CIA covert op things that you can burn through, because it's just like, oh, so riveting. What's this guy going to do? Read some of the classics like Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, Crazy Rich Asians, which is another good love story. And then the book Love Story, which was done a while ago, back in 1970. So yeah, I think it's just for writers, get out there and read and write, and don't be afraid to share. And, if you're an entrepreneur or a technical manager, I think empathy is one of the things that should be fostered more, so that you understand where your people are coming from, because everyone has a life outside of work and they bring all that baggage with them. And you don't know that, it's going to be hard to deal with. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you very much, Jarie, for being my guest on the Authors Podcast. Thank you, listeners. And I hope that was inspiring and insightful. Certainly was for me. I've made some notes. And I will see you on the next episode of the Authors Podcast. This is me, your host, Lisa Newton, signing out.
You have been listening to the Authors Podcast with Lisa Newton, sponsored by Boogles Limited. Tweet the show at Boogles_books, spelled BOOGLEZ_books. You can also contact your host via the email address lisa@lisanewton.co.uk. And if you want to join our authors community, join the inner circle at www.writeabook.net. You have just been listening to the Authors Podcast with Lisa Newton. See you next time.